James, a humble boy, saw something that put him on alert and did the unthinkable. He broke into a luxury restaurant and warned a millionaire not to drink the coffee served by his own wife. The desperate warning changed everything, and the next day, a luxury car stopped in front of James's house, bringing a surprise that would transform his life forever. Get ready for an exciting story of courage, redemption, and generosity. James, a 12-year-old boy, lived with his mother, Mary, in a humble house on the outskirts of Chicago. The residence, despite being old and worn by time, was a refuge of love and affection. The peeling walls revealed layers of faded paint, marks of years of struggle and resilience. On rainy days, the leaks scattered across the ceiling forced Mary to position buckets strategically, a gesture so routine that it had become almost automatic. But even these adversities could not erase the warm energy that filled that home. For James, it was the best place in the world, for it was there that his mother enveloped him with an unconditional love that made any difficulty seem bearable. Mary worked long hours as a seamstress, transforming pieces of fabric into elegant dresses and tailored suits. Her talent was remarkable, but the orders did not come frequently enough to provide comfort for the small family. James, attentive to his mother's dedication, did what he could to help. With his old bicycle, whose handlebars already bore signs of rust and whose tires occasionally went flat, he rode through the neighborhood delivering finished clothes to Mary's clients. Despite his exhausting routine, the boy never complained. He knew that each pedal stroke contributed to sustaining the home he loved so much. One afternoon, while crossing the city with the cold autumn wind cutting across his face, James spotted something that made him slow down his pedaling. It was a sophisticated restaurant with impeccably clean glass windows revealing an interior decorated with sparkling chandeliers and tables covered with snow-white tablecloths. He stopped his bicycle on the sidewalk, intrigued by the sight of that world so distant from his reality. Inside, sitting at one of the tables near the window, was a man of impeccable appearance. His dark gray suit seemed tailor-made, fitting perfectly to every line of his body. He held a porcelain cup with the same elegance with which he conducted the conversation with a woman in front of him. The woman was equally impressive. She wore a navy blue outfit that exuded sophistication, and her blonde hair was styled in a delicate bun. She laughed softly while gesturing with hands adorned with discreet but visibly expensive rings. The two seemed so absorbed in their conversation that they did not notice the boy outside. James, for his part, could not take his eyes off them. He could not quite explain what fascinated him about that scene, but there was something in that environment, in the sparkle of the wine glasses, in the muffled sound of classical music escaping through the slightly open door, that made him feel as if he were looking into a completely different world, almost unattainable. The man sitting in the restaurant was Christopher, a millionaire businessman widely known in Chicago for his ability to turn businesses into overwhelming successes. He had an aura of confidence and authority, someone who always seemed to be in control. Beside him was Julia, his wife. She exuded elegance and warmth, but her eyes, although bright, carried something difficult to decipher, a shadow of hidden intentions that few noticed. James, still standing outside with his bicycle, continued to observe the scene through the window. He couldn't explain why it intrigued him so much. Perhaps it was the couple's imposing presence, or maybe the contrast between the luxury of the restaurant and his own reality. But something specific caught his attention. As Julia, sitting facing the street, chatted and smiled, her movements began to seem less natural, more calculated. Suddenly, James saw something that made his eyes widen. With her right hand, Julia discreetly pulled a small envelope from her purse. She carefully opened the package, and James could clearly see as she poured a white powder into Christopher's coffee cup. She did this skillfully, hiding the movement behind her body while continuing to smile and talk as if nothing had happened. To anyone else, it would have been a completely unnoticed gesture, but James saw everything, and a chill ran down his spine. Horrified, he knew he had to act. Even without fully understanding what had just happened, something in his intuition screamed that this was wrong. He dropped his bicycle on the sidewalk, ran to the restaurant entrance, and without thinking twice, forcefully opened the glass door, drawing the attention of everyone present. The sound of the door slamming echoed, and some customers turned to see the breathless boy enter. The waiters tried to stop him, but James skillfully dodged them. His small figure weaved between the tables with the agility of someone who had faced many busy streets on his bicycle. Approaching the table, he shouted with all the strength he could muster, "Please, sir, don't drink that coffee." Christopher, who was about to bring the cup to his lips, stopped instantly. He looked at James, intrigued, while Julia stared at him with an expression that mixed surprise and fury. "Who are you? What do you think you're doing here?" she asked, trying to sound indignant, but her voice trembled slightly. "I saw," James continued, pointing at the cup. "I saw what she did. She put something in your coffee." The silence in the restaurant was palpable. Customers and staff looked on in shock at the scene. Christopher slowly lowered the cup, his eyes fixed on the boy. He then turned to Julia, whose features had changed drastically. She now wore a forced smile, but her hands were gripping the napkin tightly. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, trying to appear offended. "It's just a child trying to get attention. Get him out of here." Before Christopher could say anything, the restaurant's security guard quickly approached and grabbed James by the arm. "Come on, kid. You can't just barge into a place like this," the man said, as James struggled to break free. "Please, believe me," James pleaded as he was dragged outside. "Don't drink that coffee. I saw what she did." Christopher continued to look at the cup and then at his wife. Something about the situation didn't seem right. Julia was acting defensively, almost desperately. When James was finally thrown out of the restaurant, Christopher did not bring the cup to his lips. Instead, he pushed it aside on the table and leaned back in his chair, watching Julia closely. Outside, James stood on the sidewalk, catching his breath. He didn't know if his intervention had worked, but he felt he had done what he needed to do. As he gripped the handlebars of his bicycle tightly, he saw Christopher's figure through the window. The man still hadn't touched the coffee, but the look on his face showed that doubt had been planted. That night, Christopher couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his spacious living room, his mind restless. The face of the boy who had burst into the restaurant kept appearing in his memory. There was something in James's gaze, something pure and desperate, that made him believe this was not just a child's prank. The memory of the scene in the restaurant, with the warning shout and the direct accusation against Julia, began to make sense as he replayed every detail. Her hesitation, her exaggerated indignation, and even the slight tremor in her voice when she tried to divert attention. Determining that he needed answers, Christopher picked up the phone and called the head of security for his company, a trusted man. He briefly explained the situation and asked him to discreetly investigate the restaurant. The order was clear: check if there was anything that could confirm or deny the boy's story. While he waited, Christopher tried to convince himself that it could all be a misunderstanding. Maybe the child was confused. Maybe Julia was right, and the boy was just a delinquent seeking attention. But the more he thought, the more he felt that something was wrong. Julia had left the restaurant visibly tense, and when they got home, she avoided any mention of the incident, pretending that nothing had happened. For someone who claimed to be offended by the accusation, her behavior was strangely evasive. A few hours later, the phone rang. It was the head of security. "Sir, we found something," he said in a serious voice. "Miss Julia left the restaurant in a hurry and apparently dropped a small envelope near the table. Our team managed to recover the item. We analyzed it, and, well, the contents are concerning." Christopher felt his heart race. "What is it about?" he asked, already fearing the answer. "Poison, sir. A highly toxic powder. We have confirmed the results. There is no doubt." For a moment, Christopher was silent. The impact of that revelation hit him like a blow. He thanked the security officer and hung up the phone, sitting down in his leather armchair. What would he do now? There was a part of him that still didn't want to believe it. Julia, his wife, the woman with whom he had shared years of his life, was truly capable of something so cruel? But the facts were there, clear as day. Determining that he needed to face the truth, Christopher decided to talk to Julia. He climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, where he found her sitting on the bed, distracted with her phone. When he entered, she looked up and smiled in a rehearsed way. "Are you coming to bed?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. "Not before we talk," Christopher replied, with a firmness that made her smile disappear. He slowly approached, throwing the envelope with the remnants of the poison onto the bed. Care to explain what this is? Julia turned pale. For a moment, she tried to mask her reaction, but Christopher knew that look. She was cornered. I, I don't know what that is. Where did you get this? From the restaurant, he replied coldly. The same place where you tried to kill me. That's ridiculous, she shouted, getting up from the bed. Are you going to believe the word of a street kid? Just some boy who barged in screaming at the restaurant like a madman? I would believe anyone before I believe you right now, Julia. Christopher shot back, his voice sharp. I had that powder analyzed, and we know exactly what it is. Stop lying. Julia tried to maintain the facade, but under Christopher's firmness, her resistance began to crumble. Within minutes, under pressure, she broke down and confessed. Fine, I did it. Are you happy now? She screamed, her eyes filled with rage. You always so perfect, so untouchable. Meanwhile, I was just a decorative piece in your life. I thought I deserved more than crumbs. I deserved all of this. Your fortune, your name. The words cut Christopher like a blade. He was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the gravity of the betrayal. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with pain but resolute. You've already lost everything, Julia. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. Julia tried to argue, but he did not yield. He called the personal security officer to escort her out, while she protested and threatened. But Christopher remained firm. When the door finally closed behind her, he felt an immense weight on his shoulders. Despite everything, he felt no relief, only emptiness. But there was one thing he couldn't forget: the boy who saved his life. James, with his desperate warning, had risked everything to protect him, expecting nothing in return. Christopher knew he needed to find him. He needed to thank him. But more than that, he felt that this boy could be the beginning of something new in his life. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still goodness in the world. The next morning, the sun shone timidly over the simple streets of the outskirts of Chicago. Inside the small house, James was sitting next to his mother, Mary, helping her sew. He threaded the lines through the fabrics while she operated the old sewing machine, which made a constant noise. It was a day like any other, with both immersed in work, trying to finish an order before the deadline. Suddenly, the sound of a powerful engine cut through the neighborhood's silence. It was uncommon to hear luxury cars on those streets, where old and worn vehicles were the norm. James lifted his head and looked out the window with curiosity. Outside, a shiny black sedan was slowly parking in front of the house. The car seemed out of place there, with its immaculate paint and gleaming wheels. James's heart began to race. He had a feeling he knew who it might be. From the car, the driver's door opened and an elegant figure emerged. It was Christopher, wearing an impeccable gray suit that looked even more refined in the sunlight. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt with a natural gesture and looked around before focusing on the simple house. His posture was firm and confident, but his eyes held something different from that night at the restaurant, a mix of gratitude and seriousness. Mary, who had also heard the noise of the car, quickly stepped out onto the porch. Her expression was laden with concern. It wasn't every day that someone like Christopher showed up in a neighborhood like that, and his presence could only mean one thing in her mind: trouble. She wiped her hands on her apron, trying to appear calmer than she really was. Christopher walked up to the small gate of the house and stopped. He looked at Mary with a light smile, almost trying to convey calm. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm looking for a boy named James. Does he live here?" Mary frowned, now even more worried. She cast a glance inside the house, where James, still near the window, was watching everything with apprehension. "Yes, he lives here," she replied, her voice cautious. "Why? Is there a problem?" Christopher shook his head and took a step closer, maintaining a respectful distance. No problem. Quite the opposite. I came here to thank you." Mary didn't seem convinced. What could someone so important want with a boy like James? Before she could ask more, James appeared at the door, hesitant. He was clearly nervous, but there was something in his curiosity that made him want to understand what was happening. "It's me, sir," he said, stepping forward, his eyes alternating between Christopher and the car. "I'm James." As soon as he saw the boy, Christopher smiled genuinely, a warm smile that seemed to light up his serious face. He took another step closer, but still stayed outside the gate. "James," he said, slightly tilting his head, I just wanted to see you and thank you personally. Yesterday at the restaurant, you saved my life." Christopher's words hung in the air, and James stood still, unsure how to react. He opened his mouth to say something, but his mind was blank. He never imagined that the man he had alerted would come back to find him, let alone acknowledge what he had done as something so important. "You may not have realized it at the time, but what you did was brave," Christopher continued. "You walked into that restaurant, faced the security, ignored all the stares, and all of that to save someone you didn't even know. It's not every day that you meet someone like that." Mary opened the door of the house with a nervous smile, trying to maintain her composure in front of someone so important. "Come in, sir. Would you like some coffee?" "With pleasure," Christopher replied, entering the house with firm steps but a gentle gaze. He observed the simple yet welcoming environment as Mary led him to the central table. James remained by the side, quiet, still trying to understand the reason for such an unexpected visit. Mary placed 2 cups of coffee on the table and sat down next to her son, looking at Christopher with curiosity. After a few moments of silence, she finally asked, "Mr. Christopher, what exactly happened yesterday? James told me a bit, but I would like to understand better." Christopher, holding the cup of coffee, took a deep breath before starting. He looked at Mary and James, the weight of what he was about to say evident in his eyes. "Yesterday at the restaurant, something that seemed like just another ordinary meal almost ended my life." Mary's eyes widened and James straightened in his chair, visibly tense. "James saw something I didn't notice," Christopher continued. "My wife, Julia, was with me at the restaurant. She seemed normal, as always, but while I was distracted, she poured a white powder into my cup of coffee." Mary covered her mouth, horrified. "My God!" Christopher nodded. "I didn't know anything. I was about to drink that coffee when James ran into the restaurant and shouted for me to stop. It was a confusing moment. At first, I thought he was just causing a scene, but there was something in his tone, an urgency that couldn't be ignored. So I hesitated." He paused, looking at James with a mix of gratitude and respect. "I had the situation investigated after I left the restaurant. I found out that Julia left in a hurry and left behind the envelope with the powder. When the test confirmed it was poison, everything fell into place." "Poison?" Mary whispered, instinctively squeezing James's shoulder. "Yes," Christopher confirmed. "My own wife planned to take my life. I confronted her, and she ended up confessing. All for money for my fortune. But if it weren't for James, she would have succeeded." Mary seemed paralyzed, absorbing every word. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at her son. "James, you saved this man's life. You did something so great." Christopher smiled, though there was sadness in his eyes. "He did more than that, Mary. He gave me a new perspective. James had no reason to act, but still he had the courage. He did the right thing when many would have simply ignored it." James, blushing from the praise, shook his head. "I just didn't want something bad to happen. It felt like the right thing to do." Mary quickly wiped her eyes, trying to regain her voice. "Mr. Christopher, I don't know how to thank you for coming here and telling us this. I am so proud of James. I never imagined my son would do something so important." Christopher placed the cup on the table and leaned slightly forward. "That's why I'm here today. I needed to come personally to thank you, but I also want to give back in some way." He took a thick envelope from his suit pocket and placed it on the table, pushing it towards Mary. "Sir, what is this?" she asked hesitantly. "Inside this envelope is enough money for you to pay off debts, fix this house, and have more comfort," Christopher said, his voice firm but full of sincerity. "I know James didn't do what he did expecting anything in return, but please accept this as a small thank you. I will never forget what he did for me." Mary looked at the envelope with trembling hands, then at James, and finally at Christopher. I don't know what to say. We didn't expect any of this." "Then just say you will use it to improve your lives," Christopher replied with a warm smile. "It's the least I can do for everything you've done for me." James looked at his mother, who finally took the envelope carefully. Tears of gratitude streamed down her face as she murmured, "Thank you, sir, from the bottom of my heart." Christopher stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. He looked at James one last time and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Never lose that courage, James. The world needs more people like you. A few days after Christopher's visit to their home, James believed that everything would return to normal. He continued helping his mother with orders and deliveries, but he couldn't help but remember the elegant man and the envelope that now rested safely in a drawer in the kitchen. However, on a sunny morning, as James was getting ready to go out on his bike, Mary appeared at the door holding an envelope. "James, something has arrived for us," she said, looking at her son with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. James rushed to the table and opened the envelope. Inside was a formal invitation, written on fine paper with golden letters. Christopher was inviting them to lunch at his mansion over the weekend. Mary read the invitation silently and sighed, adjusting her apron. "Do you think we should go? I don't know if we belong in that kind of place." "Of course we should go, Mom," James replied with an excited smile. "He has helped us so much. I think it would be rude to refuse." On Saturday, mother and son dressed carefully. Mary wore her best dress, while James, a bit awkwardly, put on a clean shirt that he hardly ever wore. When Christopher's black car arrived to pick them up, both were surprised by the uniformed driver, who greeted them with a cordial smile. Christopher's mansion was everything James had never imagined seeing up close. The tall iron gates opened automatically, revealing an extensive, perfectly manicured garden with water fountains and statues that seemed to belong to another world. The house, with its enormous windows and imposing facade, looked like a castle out of a movie. James and Mary got out of the car, admiring the place in silence. At the entrance, Christopher personally welcomed them, dressed in elegant but more casual clothes than he had worn before. His smile was warm. "Welcome. I'm very happy you came," as he said, guiding them inside the house. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive. The marble floor shone under the crystal chandeliers, and the walls were decorated with paintings and photographs that seemed to tell stories of travels and achievements. Mary looked uncomfortable, but Christopher, noticing this, tried to put her at ease. "Please consider this place as if it were yours. Today I just want you to relax and enjoy." The dining room was impeccably arranged, with a long table filled with sophisticated dishes. Christopher led them to prominent seats and, before they began the meal, made a point to thank them again. "You are a special family, and this lunch is just a way to show my gratitude for everything." As they savored the meal, James was fascinated by Christopher's stories. He spoke of his travels, business, and challenges, but also asked questions about James and Mary's lives, genuinely interested in what they had to say. For the first time, James felt at ease, sharing about his bike, the deliveries, and the small dreams he had never shared with anyone else. When lunch came to an end, Christopher stood up and picked up a white envelope that was next to his place. He smiled at James, but this time there was a special sparkle in his eyes. "I have something for you, James. A gift. Something I think can change your life." James looked at him confused, while Mary watched silently, seeming to anticipate something important. Christopher handed the envelope to the boy, who opened it carefully. Inside was a formal document, with James's name highlighted at the top. "This is a full scholarship," Christopher said, before any questions could be asked. "You will study at one of the best schools in Chicago. All costs are covered. Tuition, materials, transportation, everything. I believe in your potential, James. You are a bright boy, and I want you to have every opportunity to achieve your dreams." James was speechless, staring at the paper as if it were a treasure. I don't know what to say. Is this for real?" "Yes, it is," Christopher replied, smiling. "I see something special in you, James. You have a courage and kindness that are not easily found. I want you to have all the tools to build the future you deserve." Mary brought her hands to her face, trying to hold back tears. "Mr. Christopher, this is more than we could have dreamed. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," he said, shaking his head. "You have already given me something that no amount of money can buy. Now it's my turn to give back." James looked at his mother and then at Christopher with a smile that was both shy and full of gratitude. "I will work very hard, sir. I promise. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Christopher replied, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. In that moment, James realized that his life would never be the same. The opportunity that Christopher had given him was more than he could have imagined, and he was determined to make the most of every second. The transition to the new school was a mix of excitement and apprehension for James. The institution was huge, modern, and completely different from anything he had known. The wide hallways shone under the light of the chandeliers. The science labs looked like they were straight out of a futuristic movie, and the classrooms were equipped with technology he had never seen before. On the first day, while holding his new backpack, a gift from Christopher, James felt small in the face of such a grand environment. He knew he needed to seize the opportunity, but that didn't make the curious and sometimes suspicious glances any easier to face. Some classmates whispered about him, and although no one was openly hostile, James sensed that he was not considered one of them. But as always, James used his determination to face the challenges. He was a dedicated student, always the first to arrive in class and the last to leave. His constant effort began to catch the attention of the teachers, who quickly recognized his potential. He showed a special talent for math and science, solving problems with an ease that impressed even the more experienced students. A memorable moment occurred during a school robotics competition. Despite being new and unknown, James decided to participate. His team was made up of students who, at first, didn't trust his abilities very much. But as the days of work went by, James demonstrated not only intelligence but also a capacity to lead and collaborate that surprised everyone. When the robot they built won first place in the competition, his classmates finally saw him differently. He was no longer just the new kid. He was someone they could count on. As James faced his challenges at school, Mary also saw her life transform. With Christopher's support, her sewing business gained a new dimension. He helped Mary acquire a modern sewing machine and renovate her small workshop. But the biggest impact came from the connections Christopher provided. He introduced Mary to important clients, influential people who were charmed by her talent and dedication. Soon Mary began receiving orders for high-quality dresses and suits for sophisticated events, something she had never imagined. Despite her growing success, Mary did not lose her essence. She made a point of serving her old neighborhood clients, those who had supported her when she had almost nothing. Over time, the lives of mother and son changed drastically. The humble home they lived in was renovated. The peeling walls were painted, the leaks were fixed, and the old furniture was replaced with more comfortable, yet simple pieces, just as they preferred. They now had a dignified and peaceful life, free from the financial worries that had once haunted them. Despite all the changes, James and Mary never lost their humility. They remained the same people with generous hearts and solid values. Mary still woke up early to work, and James, even with the busy school routine, found time to help his mother whenever he could. Christopher, who had become a close friend of the family, visited them regularly. He took pride in seeing how James and Mary were thriving. For him, helping that family was not just a way of giving back, but also a way to reclaim something within himself, a connection to the simple and genuine values he had lost throughout his life of luxury and power. James, now integrated into his new school and full of ambitions, began to envision a future that had once seemed impossible. He dreamed of studying engineering and using his knowledge to help others, just as Christopher had helped him. The journey was just beginning, but with determination, support, and the kind heart he had always possessed, James knew he could achieve anything. 5 years had passed since the day Christopher walked through the door of James and Mary's small house, changing their lives forever. James was now a confident and determined young man with ambitious plans for the future. He was in his final year at one of the best schools in Chicago, with impeccable grades and involvement in projects that already set him apart as a promising talent. Despite his busy routine, one thing had never changed: the regular visits to Christopher, who had become more than just a benefactor. He was now a mentor, a father figure, and an invaluable friend. That afternoon, James arrived at the mansion as he did regularly. He parked his bicycle, now much newer, but still carrying the symbolism of his journey, on the stone path of the garden, and was greeted with a warm smile from Christopher. The man, who seemed to have found a new joy in life since meeting James, led him to the garden at the back of the mansion. It was a place they both loved, with tall trees, flowers of every color, and a small lake where the sun reflected like a mirror. "I'm glad you came today," Christopher said as they sat on a wooden bench under a pleasant shade. "I have something important to tell you." James raised an eyebrow, curious. I hope it's something good. Christopher smiled. More than that, it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. He paused, as if he wanted to choose the right words. James, you are like a son to me. Since that day at the restaurant, my life has changed completely. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed, a true purpose. So, I made a decision. He took an envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket, something that seemed to have become a habit. James chuckled softly, recalling other significant moments tied to envelopes. This time it's not money or a scholarship, Christopher joked, handing the paper to James. The young man opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the words of the formal document. He widened his eyes as he understood what he was reading. You are becoming my official godfather? Christopher nodded, his expression serene but filled with emotion. Yes, I want you to know that, beyond everything we've done together, beyond the support and friendship, you have a permanent place in my life. You are not just someone I helped. You are family to me now. James was silent for a few seconds, processing the weight of that. He looked at Christopher, his eyes shining with tears he was trying to hold back. I don't even know what to say, Mr. Christopher. This means so much to me. You have been everything I never knew I needed. A mentor, a role model, now a godfather. Christopher let out a light laugh, placing a firm hand on James's shoulder. And you have been all of that for me too, James. You reminded me of what is important in life. You gave me hope in something greater than any fortune. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the trees sway gently in the wind. Then James broke the silence, his voice low but filled with conviction. Mr. Christopher, one day I will repay all of this, not just to you, but to someone who needs it. I will do for someone what you did for me. Christopher smiled, satisfied. I know you will, James. I see that in you. You taught me what true generosity is, and more importantly, you showed me that it's possible to make a difference in someone's life without expecting anything in return. So, thank you for everything. The two remained on the bench, talking about the future. James shared his plans to study engineering and how he wanted to create projects that would help underprivileged communities. Christopher, in turn, shared stories from his youth, advice, and dreams that now included seeing James achieve everything he desired. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold, the two stayed side by side. There was no need to say anything more. Their lives were forever intertwined, an unlikely connection that had transformed both in ways they could never have imagined. The story ended there, with the tranquil sound of the wind and the reflection of the sunset on the lake, as James and Christopher looked to the future with hope and eternal gratitude. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to continue watching.